Hey, internet. Okay, so I just recently, yesterday, put up a video helping a person from disc golf form check work on their throw a little bit. And the reason I asked for his permission to post that one is because it was just a really clear visual example of the difference between someone who's still throwing off their back leg versus what I try to teach, which is throwing off of your front leg. So I just wanted to talk more about, kind of highlight the differences of that and why I coach the way that I coach, and help you understand how to recognize in your own throw which one you're doing. So let's do that. The way that most human bodies tend to learn to throw, and there's nothing wrong with it. Like this guy it looked like he was throwing pretty far. But if you want to get past that like 300, 350, 400 mark, wherever that is for your body type and your athleticism, I think the only repeatable way to do that for most average bodies is to learn to throw off of your front leg, which is using physics in a more meaningful way and using it makes it possible to transmit your momentum into the disc instead of just translating back leg drive into the disc, which is how we normally think of throwing. So it's like kind of launching versus throwing is how I think about it in terms of linguistics. So anyways, what most people do is they get too much weight on their rear foot, and their primary force creation thingy is their rear glute. So your rear glute pulls this bone to be in line with your spine. It pushes your hip forward. So if I'm in a like decently coiled position here, I have this bend from my spine to my knee. So my hip is bent this way. If I then fire this glute, that's going to result in some hip rotation. So my belt buckle is pointed this way, and if I fire that glute, it's going to rotate my hips. That is the primary mover in most people's throw. A lot of beginners get their arms stuck behind. A lot of young athletic folks do a good job of getting their arm forward, but it's not necessarily in the most mechanically sound way. But that's the primary mover, is the rear glute. What I want to shift focus to in terms of being the primary mover is the front quad. So that's why I set everyone up on these one leg drills, because when you throw the way that is intuitive, where you're throwing off your back leg, all of the power comes boom there, and the front leg is just placeholder. It's not really doing anything, and you're probably putting too much torque in it, and your front knee might get sore if you do that too hard too long. So I'm shifting away from that model. Not that there's anything wrong with it. If it's not causing pain and you're happy with the way you throw that way. That's great. I think the more mechanically efficient way to throw is throwing on your front leg. So all this one leg stuff that I have people go through is just to calibrate your body to get used to that new way of throwing. And once you have that and you've demonstrated an ability to do that in balance and you're able to create a decent amount of power, then we shift to transitioning that back into your full throw by doing not one legs, but standstills, and adding more weight shift to those standstills, and then adding one steps and then putting it into your whole X step. So it's a progression based approach where there's a step 1 and a step 6, and you go through them in order and bounce back and forth between them often to gain understanding from the first ones and apply them to the last one. So what's different about the model is, rather than the power coming from this rear hip extending, the power is coming from the front quad firing and extending the knee. So your glute extends your hip, pushes your hip forward. Your quad is what sends your foot down, or your hip up in this case. So in the one legs, when we're starting, we're just working on balance. Here, the front leg is not moving, not rotating is a big key, but it's also not pumping. You're not using your quad to extend yet. Your front leg is just a stand-in for an active brace, and your pelvis is moving on top of that hip. So the femur isn't really moving. the pelvis is rotating on top of that. That's the type of force, the type of hip rotation that we want to happen in a real throw. And it's not even hip rotation, it's pelvis rotation. Because my hip, if I define my hip as the ball joint in my femur, which is right here, that is not moving. It does move back and forth a little bit to maintain my balance, but it's not rotating. It's not moving up and down. It's just migrating to keep balance. My pelvis is rotating. If I rotate the hips, that looks like this. This is not good because you get knee torque, knee torque, knee torque, and knee torque, and it's not good. The point of this way of throwing is to eliminate knee torque so that you can use your front leg more effectively as you would in a single leg squat, where your leg is just doing this and everything's staying in line. It's not twisting at all, because then you have a shearing force going on, and you wouldn't want to be doing a shearing force and a quad dominant lifting force at the same time. They're not compatible because knee ligaments. So what we're trying to do is make the power happen because this hip is moving backwards and this hip is not being fired forward so much. There is a little bit of that motion present, but it's not at all something you need to focus on. It's just something that'll happen. The job of the rear leg and the rear hip is to carry momentum past the X step into the brace. And then for the leg to get out of the way so that the hip can come forward. So what that looks like is if I'm in Seabass's immovable horse stance, right, where we shouldn't be, because it hurts our hips if you're internally rotation dominant like me. When you're here, this hip can't move because that leg is stuck to the ground. Like there's a stop point here where this can't go forward anymore because that is in the way. So it has to turn over to allow this to come forward. And when that happens, the hip is dragging the leg with it, so the hip goes too slow. If I instead get into this position, there's plenty of range of motion where my rear hip, boom, can slam forward. That's not really how you want to do it. That is a little bit more active than you would want. You would want passive, but there's room for this to come forward before it has to pull my leg around because I've gotten my leg inside of the rotation. So the same exact thing happens in Drew Gibson's off arm. If you were to just stand here, which reminds me of one of Yanni's drills, Spin Doctor. If this is stuck here and I go to throw, I can't rotate this forward anymore with this staying stuck. So if I leave this here, when this hits this point, it's going to have to start bringing the arm with it, so it's going to slow down. You do want pieces to slow down, but you'd want them to slow down at the right time. This is too early. So what Drew Gibson does is he gets his rear arm inside the rotation. Almost everyone does this, everyone with a good off arm. Girthy does it like this. He's pulling that arm inside of the rotation. Gibson does it like this. He's getting the arm inside of the rotation. So you're going from open, where your arms are going to slow you down, to close, where your arms can move quickly. You can rotate quickly like the ice skater thing. And then after your throw happens, everything's going to fan out again and start to slow you down. So off arm inside makes rotation faster. Rear leg outside makes hip rotation slower. Rear leg inside allows hip rotation to be quick. So you want quick and then slowing down. That's too much for now, but the slowdown, this leg position makes the slowdown happen here, which is about the right time. So then your lower body starts slowing down, your upper body gets to a hit point, starts slowing down right before a hit point, allows your arm to speed up. Kinematic sequence stuff, again, too much for now. That's a teaser for next time. But we want the quad to be dominant in the motion, not the rear glute. So the way you can check your own throw to see if this is happening is basically the like overdone mime version of it is if you do a big X step and you get this kind of a line going onto your X step rather than this kind of a line where everything is straight and in good posture. This is good. This is bad. This means you're going to spend too much time and put too much weight on your rear foot. Once you're stuck on that rear foot, the only way to get off of it is to leave it stuck there and throw from that back leg. So that's kind of what it'll look like if you're throwing from your back leg. Is it'll look like this, like your throw happens there while that leg is driving. And what it'll look like if you're doing the mechanics that I shoot for is it'll look more like everything stays closed, belt buckle pointed that way, until not only your toe is down, but your heel is down. And your heel being down and this front leg firing is what starts the hip rotation. Technically not true, but don't tell anyone I said this. There is a little bit of the rear hip driving as that leg comes off the ground, but really not something you should think about. That's why I don't say that, is because it's not a useful cue. So don't think about that. It'll just happen as you start throwing well. Much more important is actually learning how to stay closed here and get your heel to come down with your toe further away from the target than your heel. So your heel's closer to the target. A lot of folks get to this position. They're like, pay attention to my leg, pay attention to my leg, pay attention. Okay, I got it. Now I'm good. And then they go burp and end up with their toe forward. So it's really important to get early to do a lot of practice spearing the heel into the ground with the heel going forward of the toe. So that helps to lock in this plane of the front leg rather than a rotation in the front leg. That's another thing to look for in your own throw. You want, look at Drew Gibson for this. Look at overthrows footage of Drew Gibson. Look at any footage of Drew Gibson. His front leg, there's a couple frames where it's heel down, fire, and then rotate. And if you look at any amateur ever who's throwing less than 300 feet for sure, 350 probably, they will tend to have this knee drift where their knee is moving towards the target a little bit and rotating a little bit during their brace, and then the heel takes over the pivot eventually. So what you really want is there to be an instant, and it's like a couple frames. It's really not very long at all, which is why no one's aware of it, because it's so short, where you're really locked into this plane and then the pivot happens. So you don't want any pivoting of the knee to be happening while the extension is happening. So you're really trying to build in this moment of no rotation where it's heel down, fire the leg, fire the quad, and then that firing helps shift weight into your heel and your pivot happens on your heel. So look for that. I feel like it's pretty easy to see once you look at slow-mo and look at the front knee specifically. And again, look at Drew Gibson. That knee is pretty solid. It does the right thing. So what I'm doing with all this one leg stuff is starting to build in some physical awareness of that will hopefully at some point carry over into your full throw. It's really hard for people to pick up because it's very counterintuitive. It makes sense to us as humans trying to throw heavy things that you need to load up back here, and it takes time to put force on something to make it go fast. So you need a lot of time to throw. Not true. We're throwing things that are very light. It does not take a lot of time to accelerate them. If you have the right impulse, you can accelerate things pretty quickly when they're only, 175 grams. So you're changing the mental model to change the physical model. It's a lot of people, when they're throwing, they worry about what feels powerful. What feels powerful is throwing that 26-pound thing. What does not feel powerful is throwing this. When you do it right, it's going to feel pretty effortless in a way. Again, linguistics can be misleading and confusing, but there's not going to be a lot of effort until The disc gets heavy as it accelerates, boom, and then at that instant, you'll be able to put a lot of force in the disc, and a lot of that force will come from that quad. And then your whole body just tensing up at the hip point as well. So I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but yeah, let's stop there. So front quad, not rear glute. And again, how to look to see if you're doing that right is, well, one more thing. When you're learning phase 1 of the one leg drill, the one leg calibration, if you will, the biggest thing is don't move that front knee. So if you go here, that's your knee winding up too much, and it's gonna want to rotate too much on the front end. Like, see how like there my knee is pointed in a different direction than my foot, and I get this like rolling up onto the blade edge twisted leg thing. What we're trying to do is just get rid of that, so you can have the leg stay there and have the throw happen from the pelvis and up, essentially. Okay, so again, let's stop there. Good luck, internet. I hope that's helpful. Also, housekeeping things. If any of this resonates with you, please go check out the Patreon. I'll put a link down below. That's the best way to support the channel. So yeah, if you're into it, check it out. Thank you.